Starting with FNAF 4 in 1983. So the timeline starts off with not FNAF 2 like I've been thinking, but rather with FNAF 4. FNAF 4 takes place in 1983 as we see from the Fredbear and Fred's cartoon on the TV in Crying Child's house, which is already weird because of the lead up to Security Breach, but that's a whole other can of worms. At this point in the timeline though, William has already built the Springlock animatronics and the Funtime animatronics since Elizabeth had already been gotten by Circus Baby. That is seemingly the only explanation we have for the stomach mounds on the Nightmare animatronics. So even before the first game starts, a Fazbear location closed down, and probably the local one, so William opened up Circus Babies to keep up his killing spree. And then it got closed down as well after the first day because his daughter gets scooped. We then have the events of FNAF 4 when Crying Child is having his birthday at Freddy's come the end of the week. When he gets there though, he's scared because he watched his sister get scooped, and then he ends up getting shoved into Fredbear's mouth and put in a coma. After fighting through a nightmare trying to stay alive, William pulls the plug and promises to put him back together. It's another question if he actually does though. Crying Child dies and then probably goes on to possess his father as the one you should not have killed. Next we have Into the Pit in 1985. And while this next moment in the timeline isn't a part of the games, it's an important moment because it's the moment time travel, like real actual time travel, is introduced into the series through a ball pit of all places. This is the half of the story that takes place in 1985 before the missing children's incident, where Oswald is jumping in and out of the ball pit to play with his new friends Chip and Mike, who are around his age, which is around 11. But one day when he comes out of the ball pit, he hears screaming and ends up being lured into a room with 6 dead kids, a representation for Charlie, Gabriel, Fritz, Jeremy, Susie, and Cassidy. He then runs into the ball pit to return to his current year in order to escape Spring Bonnie. Then we have FNAF 2 in 1987. Thanks to the date we see on the paychecks we get at the end of the game, we know this to be true. This is after the missing children's incident, but the year of the bite of 87, which is when presumably the night guard Jeremy gets his frontal lobe bitten off and then gets promoted to the day shift, which is where we come in. This is the grand reopening after the 1985 fiasco that resulted in the restaurant closing its doors, as we see in the news clippings from FNAF 1, and is when the toy animatronics are created and used, installed with a criminal database in an effort to prevent another incident from occurring. Whether they actually have these things or are just said to have them for parents to feel better is one question, but even if they did have them, we know that William is the suit technician, meaning that if they did have a database, he'd have programmed it and certainly would not include himself. At this point we see another set of killings and the toy animatronics get scrapped, whereas the withered ones, which were the original animatronics that got the kids stuffed inside them 2 years prior, are sent out to be repaired and sent to a new, smaller location. This location runs for a few years before FNAF 1 in 1993. FNAF 1, while being the first game ever released, does not take place first in the timeline. If only it were that clean. Instead, it takes place in 1993 or around then, based on minimum wage calculations MatPat did in his first ever FNAF theory, and Scott pretty much confirming this to be correct. We can also look at the Faz facts presented in FNAF AR's files that say, quote, in 1993, the most dangerous profession in the United States was actually night security guard, which seems to indicate that the first game takes place in 1993, since we know the dates of the other games where we're actually security guards. This is also in line with the Nathan Dunlap story MatPat believed the first game to be based off of, however that could also be a coincidence. This is where we see the original 5 animatronics repaired after FNAF 2's location closed, and seemingly the first game where we play as Michael Apton, since at this point he'd be old enough to hold down a full-time job, being around 21 years old if we go off his character and Into the Pit. Speaking of which, that's our next stop. Into the Pit in 2011. Into the Pit is a difficult story to place timeline-wise, other than the part that takes place in 85. So how am I certain it takes place in 2011? Well, when Oswald is describing the town in the first few pages of the story, he says that the town went downhill after the mill had closed down. So I looked into towns that went downhill after some form of mill shut down that fit other requirements that he had listed. It had to have a movie theater like Oswald said his town did, and it had to still have a population despite being mostly run down. And the closest one that I could actually find was Scotia, California, whose Pacific Lumber Company closed in 2008 and was founded in 1863, meaning it would certainly be around for 1985 when the town is thriving, as we see in the story. And since Oswald also notes that 3 years ago is when the mill closed down, when he was 8, we can reasonably assume that since Pacific Lumber closed in 2008 that he was born in 2000 and is 11 years old at the time of the story, since it's 3 years after they closed. The population of Scotia is also only 850, which also would fit the story. Now this is important because of where the timeline goes next and how time travel could actually be involved. It also gives us an age for Mike, who, based on the kid from 1985's part of the story, was around Oswald's age that year, and considering how Crying Child died in 1983, 2 years before that part, it would most likely be the older brother who'd be 11 at that time, which also fits since he's wearing a hat and participating at a Freddy's, which the teen would really not want to do. Then we have FNAF AR in 2021. Okay, so based on dates that we can see on various emails from FNAF AR, which is where most of the lore resides in this game, the events of Special Delivery actually take place in 2021, this year, which is honestly really messed up for the timeline. I went into this wanting to see how long they'd have to hold on to the toy animatronics to see if they could be the basis for the Glamrock animatronics, yet I found out that FNAF AR takes place in 2021, meaning one of 4 things. Ness could not be Vanny, since Glitch Trap hasn't been created yet, since William hasn't even been found in the back room of Fazbear's Fright. 2, that the AR game is simply not canon to the story, which throws out all the fast facts and the emails as actual lore. 3, that Glitch Trap is able to time travel thanks to being present in technology or something similar like the ball pit from Into the Pit, which is possible since we know that time travel is possible in this universe, which is why I included Into the Pit in this video in the first place. Or 4, that Vanny isn't possessed by Glitch Trap and isn't a reluctant follower after all, and is instead a copycat. We can't know for sure which of these are the case until Security Breach actually comes out, and honestly that could ruin this whole video, but if we run on the assumption that Ness is Vanessa, aka Vanny, then Security Breach would also take place in 2021, if the FNAF AR emails match with the events of the games at least, meaning that somehow Vanny got possessed by Glitch Trap before he was ever created. If this game does not take place in 2021, however, we can rework this yet again come the game's release, but at this point, all we've got to go off of is the FNAF AR emails, which seem to indicate this. This could also cause issues like if Springtrap isn't going to be discovered for another couple years, why are there versions of him being released to the public in FNAF AR? Because, like, they wouldn't know that he existed yet, right? A simple explanation to that is that they just found Springtrap before the events of FNAF 3, yet if this game does take place in 2021, it is actually possible for Vanessa to be a secret 4th Afton kid because they'd be the proper age and they do have a striking resemblance to Elizabeth. Next we have FNAF in 2023. FNAF 3 may also not have a simple timeline placement, however, the game description places it 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's closes, and the most recent closure we've seen would be the FNAF 1 closure in 1993, which would place FNAF 3 in 2023, which hasn't even happened in real life yet, so maybe we'll get a real Freddy Fazbear's for ourselves. This is when Springtrap is released in a new horror-themed Freddy's location called Fazbear's Fright, with seemingly no connection to the books, and is the company's first attempt at repairing their reputation by leaning into the horror genre. However, Henry ends up burning this place to the ground with William inside as well as the puppet, as we can see on a rare screen, except it doesn't work and William survives, because of course he does. This is also where we learn that the spirits of the original 5 missing children were put to rest in the Happiest Day minigame, which we must complete as Henry, based on Orville Elephant's dialogue in Ultimate Custom Night, and the secret final cutscene of Sister Location that shows down burnt Fazbear's Fright. Next up we have Sister Location, which is also most likely happening in 2023. Sister Location also probably takes place around the same time. We know at the very least it has to, thanks to that ending I mentioned moments ago, where Michael is describing how he's going to come find his father, where we see a burnt down Fazbear's Fright and Springtrap popping up from its ruins. This means that the game must happen at least at the same time, since at the moment of this line he hadn't found his father yet, which also means that we couldn't have played as Mike in FNAF 3 because he wouldn't be saying that he's going to come find you, because he already would have. This could be a flash forward, but I don't think that that could be the case, since at that point he'd be purple and smelling horrible, and if people are running away from him scared on the street when he's walking, how would they hire him to be the night guard at a Freddy's joint? Like, even if it is horror themed, he's there after hours and doesn't need to look the part. So the most likely scenario is that after William was released, he somehow instructed Michael to go find his sister. Or Baby actually ended up mimicking William in order to lure Mike down there, since she knew he wouldn't die and Ennard would be able to use him as a skin suit. Either way, it makes the most sense for the events of the main game of Sister Location to take place in 2023, whereas the events of the 8-bit sections take place before 1983, which are also the earliest moments we've seen in the series. Then we have FNAF 6, which takes place sometime after 2023. Now, I've had a hard time placing FNAF 6's exact time. I have yet to find that smoking gun that gives me how many years after 2023 the game takes place, yet we know it has to take place after 2023 for various reasons. One, the inclusion of Scraptrap. Whether it's a more deformed Springtrap suit or a new one altogether, William wasn't released until 2023, so it has to be after. 2. Scrap Baby. Baby gets kicked out of the Ender tribe between games in the source code for Scott's website, meaning that it has to take place after Sister Location, which seems to also happen in 2023. 3. The appearance of the Paper Pals, who made their debut in FNAF 3. 4. The appearance of both Henry and Mike, who decide to stay while the building is burning. And 5. Lefty, who was created to keep the puppet in that location so Charlie would actually be set free, since the puppet also escaped in FNAF 3 or was never there to begin with, which made Henry sure that it would be there this time. This is where we see the story attempt to be put to rest, with Baby, the puppet, Molten Freddy, who is a combination of all the Funtime animatronics, and Scraptrap all burning. But we know that William as Scraptrap escapes, even if horrifically burned by the fire, removing the entire Scraptrap suit and landing him in the hospital in a coma. That's where Ultimate Custom Night takes place, after the FNAF 6 fire. Ultimate Custom Night must take place after the FNAF 6 fire because it takes place in William's head, much like how FNAF 4 was in the Crying Child's head. Another reason I believe Crying Child to be the one you should not have killed. In addition to that, we see characters that made their first appearance in FNAF 6 present to torment William in Ultimate Custom Night, most notably the Rockstar animatronics and the Mediocre Melodies. This is also where we learn that Henry was the one who tried to release the original 5 missing children, thanks to Orville Elephant saying, quote, "He tried to release you, he tried to release us." However, running alongside this are the events prior to the Fazbear Fright story, The Man in Room 1280, which shows us what it's like in the real world during the events of Ultimate Custom Night. Since we're told that William has been there years prior to the story starting, this means that he's being tortured by the one you should not have killed for at least 2 years, as we learn, since he had, quote, been taken off life support years ago. While it could be more than 2, it has to at least be a couple years since the word years is in plural. And then finally, we have FNAF VR, which takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 and 2 years after William was taken off life support, since the priest who shows up in The Man in Room 1280 to read him his last rites was asked to do so again, quote, years after he was taken off life support, notice the plural, which happened at least 2 years after the FNAF 6 fire. At this point, if FNAF 3, 6, and 7 all take place one after each other, we'd be in 2027 at the very least. And we know that this game has to take place after FNAF 6 and The Man in Room 1280 thanks to the appearance of Glitchtrap, who appeared by scanning a circuit board to help create the AI, and Helpy, who makes an appearance as an Easter egg character and a main character in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Helpy was introduced in FNAF 6, so it has to at least come after that, and we see the circuit board be created in The Man in Room 1280 when the priest brings William to a Fazbear Entertainment warehouse where he promptly explodes, meaning at the very least FNAF VR takes place in 2027, which is 6 years after FNAF AR and probably Security Breach, which begs the question, since William only becomes Glitchtrap 6 years after Ness is acting weird, as if she is possessed, this seems to be impossible unless Ness isn't possessed, isn't Vanny, or Glitchtrap is somehow able to time travel. But has time travel been established in the games? Actually, it might have been. See, one Twitter user pointed out to me that the animatronic arm we see at the end of the Security Breach gameplay trailer looks an awful lot like Nightmare Freddy's arm. And if that is the case, firstly it would require the Nightmare animatronics to have some real physical forms, unless they're doing some dream hopping, but it would also require time travel, since FNAF 4 is the first game in the timeline, taking place in 1983, 38 years before the earliest events of Security Breach if it does take place in 2021, which it seems to. Huh. Interesting. There we have it, friends. How long is the FNAF timeline? 44 years at its most conservative, assuming that FNAF 3, 5, 6, and 7 all take place in 2023. What do you think? And do you appreciate the lengths I went to for this video? It might be one of the longest non-stream or gameplay videos on the channel, so I really hope you did. Send this to MatPat and see if we can get his insight, and comment down below with what you'd like to see us cover next. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you love FNAF as much as we do, because we talk about it every day. Okay, so a couple videos ago I suggested that thanks to the FNAF AR email dates, that security breach, if Vanny is supposed to be possessed, that it would have to come before FNAF 3, and while some of you are accepting and appreciative of that theory, many people I seemed, should I say, hesitant to accept my ideas and proposed that, quote, I actually do some research. So I did, and I'm here to say that I found it, baby. Greetings gamers and welcome back to Top 10 Gaming. I'm Connor Monroe and this is my FNAF theory, the missing link that proves the security breach timeline. Let's do it. Now just to go over things first, what was my original timeline proposed in that last theory? Well, it starts with FNAF 4 in 1983 that we see thanks to the TV in Crying Child's house. Then we see the 1985 part of Into the Pit, followed by FNAF 2 and Freddy Fazbear's grand reopening in 1987. FNAF 1 takes place after that in 1993, calculated by Matt Patton in his first theory video, as well as being confirmed by a Faz fact from FNAF AR. Then comes Into the Pit with the present day, at least the present day in the book, and I'm including Into the Pit because time travel would technically be required and Into the Pit is what introduces time travel. And then we run into FNAF AR. Now the FNAF AR emails have dates ranging the game from 2019 to 2021, which I'm guessing is dependent on when you are actually playing the game, since it's meant to be the present day. And since security breach is linked to special delivery via those emails and Ness along with the other weird happenings, we can reasonably assume that security breach would come next. Then we have to fast forward 2 years and see FNAF 3 with the Fazbear Frights attraction and sister location happening simultaneously thanks to the secret sister location ending. And to end the current timeline we have FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, and VR happening one after each other. However, we only know that FNAF VR takes place at least 4 years after FNAF 6 thanks to the Man in Room 1280 from Bunny Call, the most controversial point in this timeline being FNAF 3 taking place after security breach and AR, which a lot of people seem to have issues with. Obviously, there are some discrepancies that need to be made when talking about the FNAF timeline, since as Scott sees the story play out in his mind, previous moments may not align to a perfect fit. So information that is revealed later should be taken as a priority, like MatPat stated in his most recent timeline video after Ultimate Custom Night's release. So they didn't find Springtrap until night 2 of FNAF 3 would have to be replaced with them discovering Springtrap sooner than we thought, but only releasing him later on while trying to test to make sure everything was working before opening Fazbear's Fright, so that he could then appear as a character in special delivery, maybe perhaps as a way to hype up the actual location. But there's another problem that I want to address, saying that we have seen a Spring Bonnie time travel before, like in Into the Pit. So time travel is not out of the question for this scenario. There also seem to be quite a few people who believe that FNAF 3 takes place in 2013, since we know that the FNAF 4 location closed thanks to Crying Child getting chomped. So 30 years after 1983 would be 2013. However, the description for FNAF 3 states that, quote, 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, meaning that the establishment was indeed called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and to our understanding that bite incident from FNAF 4 actually took place in Fredbear's Family Diner, thanks to the limited number of animatronics as well as them both being gold. While yes, other Freddy Fazbear's locations at this time were open, this incident did not occur at one, and this begs the question, does FNAF 3 rather take place in 2017, after the FNAF 2 location closes? Well, if we look back at that quote again, we know that that's not the case, since it says itself that, quote, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumor and a childhood memory, which couldn't be the case given that the FNAF 1 location that takes place in 1993 wouldn't be open if that's really what happened. If the 1987 location was the last one to close, it would make sense, but there being another Freddy Fazbear's open in 1993 means that the tragedies have not yet become a distant memory, especially since they're posting news clippings about the original incidents on the walls. And even if we didn't put them there, someone else is posting them on the wall as a prank. Sure, the hallucinations may be what causes them to change, but they're not the reason they're actually on the wall. We can still see the articles when we aren't hallucinating anyways, like in the first few nights. So why do I think that FNAF 3 has to take place after security breach? Because there seems to be a lot going on. Hell, what I'm saying now could even be pointing towards security breach taking place in the 80s if you look at it a certain way, since thanks to Montgomery Gator we have all the proof we need. Take a look at the characters in the background of the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, the ones in color at least. They have various different masks on that are each pretty much explained away thanks to the mediocre melodies introduced in FNAF 6. Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and the hippo guy. However, there are a couple outliers even with these other animatronics. The first one being the very first guy on this lineup who's wearing a green mask, which absolutely could be referring to Happy Frog, but that doesn't look like a freaking frog to me. Are you kidding? Frogs don't have those kind of faces. Even animatronic ones would not have a snout that goddamn long. A frog's face does not come out to here, people, okay? You know what does though? Alligators. And who do we see in Security Breach? A green alligator with a long snout. Who else do we see? A wolf who maybe seems to be the same color that Bonnie was, which as we learn is supposed to be blue despite looking purple. And what other mask do we see that doesn't have a mediocre melodies equivalent? A blue mask with a snout like a wolf would have. Interesting. So, are the two new main lineup animatronics actually present in the Happiest Day minigame? We can't say for certain after all because these are 8-bit, but it certainly makes a hell of a lot more sense now, right? Plus I don't care if it's a robotic frog or not, okay? No frog is going to have that freaking snout, okay? It's not gonna be out here and it's not gonna be this thin, okay? That's an alligator.